morning. This is Jim Mayola, and
Jim.
it is Tuesday, June 2nd.
Hard to believe, isn't it?
2010, and it is my pleasure to be talking to my good friend Earl Lambert.
Thank you.
And Earl, so tell me a little bit about yourself. You're here to tell your story.
Yeah, well, it's a long story.
Well, take your time.
I was born up on West Main Street in Westminster, you know where Vince's Seafood is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, to the left of that, there's a 3-story building with like bay windows. I was born on the second floor there in 1937.
Okay.
And
so how old are you then?
73.
73, okay.
Yeah. And a little corn humor, I guess, here in the beginning. At that time, passenger trains were running through town.
Mm-hmm.
And my father, who was 52 when I was born, my mother was 42. I was a latecomer. And he always told everybody that I was such a pretty baby that he allowed the people to come up from the train to see me.
Oh, no.
Crazy. I'm sure that never happened. And look what 73 years did to me here. No pretty baby.
Oh, you're looking fine.
So anyway, yeah, that's where it all started. And we lived there about a year, moved down on Deer Park Road and into a log cabin.
So you moved out to the country.
Out to the country, it's about 8 miles out, into a log cabin.
Mm-hmm.
We had one room downstairs, the main floor, which was our kitchen, living room, and dining room.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 bedrooms upstairs and a larger hallway area, which wasn't big enough to be a room, but they used for storage. No indoor plumbing.
Right.
I mean, we had a hand pump outside of the house, and for heat, my parents had a coal oil stove, kerosene stove, whatever, and for cooking, they had a combination type stove that it was wood and coal on one side and the 2 burners, I believe, of gas on the other. That's what they cooked with. Wow. We had no heat upstairs. So and the cabin was covered with some kind of asphalt shingles or something, 3 sides, the front and both sides. The back was still wide open log. And some of the mortar had fallen out in the back there. So like I can remember in the wintertime, some snow blew in under my bed. And also my mother would heat a brick, wrap it in a towel, and I would take that along to bed to keep warm, or at least get warm in the beginning. We, this pump situation, now my father had, he was a small-time cattle dealer. We always had all kind of animals there, cows, sheep, goats, you name it, we had it. Horses and ponies. A lot of the kids would have loved to have been in my position where I could ride the ponies or horses. If it didn't have a motor on it, I wasn't interested. Yeah. So, you know, but this water situation, now we had to carry water down there for those animals all the time. And here again, my father being, I don't recommend young people starting a family later in life, because my father was always more like a grandfather.
Right.
Bad health. I mean, when he was young, he was driving a horse and wagon, hauling ice, because at that time they used to cut ice off of these ponds, you know, and use it. Well, something happened, the wagon slid or whatever, threw him off, and a horse tramped on his leg. Oh. Between the ankle and the knee. Of course, at that time they didn't have much medical care, so that was always an open sore with him, and always gave him a lot of pain. And of course, he couldn't move around too fast. So that was somewhat of a benefit to me, because he couldn't catch me if I did something wrong. And that did actually happen. I can remember one time there was twin boys that lived down the road from us that we grew up together. We were like brothers. I was up at their house one morning when I was supposed to have been helping to feed the cattle or whatever, and I remember it was close to our home. I remember he came up there and broke a limb off of the lilac bush. Right. He caught me across the legs one time on the way out, but he couldn't catch me for anything further. So, but like I say, I think you're better off starting a family when you're young, because if you wait, you lose your patience, you know, and it's just different. Sure. But anyway, That's the way that went.
So now you grew up in a house that had no running water, no bathroom facilities.
No
Did you have
bathroom.
electricity?
We did have electric.
Okay, so you had electric
Uh-huh.
lights.
Electric lights.
Okay, so but
No TV.
No
Had a
TV.
radio.
Okay. What did you listen to on the radio, Earl?
I can remember here again getting in trouble with Sky King.
No kidding.
I hear in the evening after school when I was supposed to be helping to feed the cattle or whatever, and I'm sitting in the house. I used to love to hear Sky King in the evening, but that's one thing in particular that I can remember on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure whether we had WTTR at that time or not, but
Well, Sky King was one of the shows that actually made the transition to television.
yeah.
A lot of them did. Yeah.
Yeah, so lost my place here.
That's okay.
You can have a section cut out here. Okay, Deer Park Road.
Okay.
Deer Park Road was pretty narrow at that time, and I can remember you almost had to run one wheel off the road if you passed another car.
Right.
Very few cars on the road. You might be 3 or 4 a day. We used to play out in the middle of the road shooting marbles and that kind of stuff, and it was never a problem. And the girls would hopscotch out there and that sort of thing. But yeah, it
Was that an asphalt road or was it?
asphalt road,
Okay, so it wasn't a dirt
but
road.
narrow.
Very narrow.
They came through later and put shoulders on it.
But you could hear cars coming if they were.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
From a good.
But they wasn't coming fast.
Right, cars didn't go
Yeah.
fast because the roads weren't good enough.
Right.
You couldn't do 50 miles an hour on a road like
Well,
that. You'd have to do 30.
I remember one of my stepsister, well, her husband had an old Buick convertible with the rumble seat.
Right.
And I can remember the long hill there from Bullocks going in towards Smallwood. He took us a ride in at one time, and we was going down there, and we actually went 50 miles an hour.
Goodness
We
gracious.
was flying.
My goodness.
Yeah,
That was exciting.
yeah, that's for sure. Now we're back in the Second World War time,
Okay.
and I can remember we used to at night would have to pull the blinds down, be air raid drill. You know, you couldn't have your lights on with the blinds up.
Okay.
And also in school, you used to have to get down under the desks. Sometimes they had exercises they had us do
In case there was a bombing.
in case there was an air raid of some
Right,
type.
okay.
Yeah. And we used to ride our bicycles on Deer Park Road a lot, go around and gather up pop bottles. And we'd get a nickel piece out of them.
No kidding.
There was a little country store right there in Smallwood, Pop Delisle store, and we'd take our bottles in there and get penny candy.
Yeah.
And then in the evenings, the farmers used to congregate around there, talk about their crops and their animals and that kind of stuff. It was a very popular area at that time.
Now, as a child, you said you had a lot of animals. Did you have a working farm there? I mean, did you do gardening or anything like that?
Gardening, yes. My mother always had a nice garden out.
Right.
And blackberries. She had a big blackberry garden and strawberries. And I think she sold her blackberries for maybe 15 cents a quart or something at the
Right.
time.
Okay.
And we had a neighboring farm, a big farm, and his cattle used to get out a lot.
Okay.
Now they would come right down through my mother's garden, and of course it would upset her. But the next day he'd come through and he'd have tomatoes for her, or corn, or whatever was growing at the time. And she also had a problem with goats at that time. We had our own goats.
Right.
They would eat her flower. They eat anything.
Oh, sure.
They would eat the flowers off, and the vegetables and that kind of stuff. So that used to get her upset too.
Now, did you farm your garden with a tractor, or did you use horses?
Well, the garden was not that big,
Okay,
so
it was
we had a
hand
push
till, yeah.
push cultivator and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But he did have a horse team that he did some neighbor work on one time, because I remember that spring harrow
Right. Yeah. Okay.
to cultivate the ground up, and then he had a little 2-wheel thing with a seat on it that came out over the top of the harrow.
Right.
And he would horse farm with that. And of course he rode because he couldn't get around very good.
Sure.
But yeah, he did do quite a bit of work with that. Eastview Pool. That was up on the Bollinger Farm, and very popular area. That's where we used to, well, before Eastview Pool, we used to go down to the creek on this farmer's place, and we would dam that up with rocks and mud and stuff like that, and we would do our swimming there, and also some fishing.
Right.
And we used to catch those small minnows and actually clean them and fix them, and they wasn't too bad. I mean, you didn't get full off of them too quick, but it was nice down there. And then the Eastview Pool came along, and like I said, very popular area in the 50s, and that's where I learned to swim, to actually swim. We couldn't swim in the creek, and I was in the Boy Scouts at that time. They also had a big pond on the other side of this pool, and we used to camp around the outer edge of that pond. And we had World War II tent. They came in two pieces, and they actually buttoned together.
No kidding.
And I think they would sleep two people, but pretty snug, you know. And then we had to dig a trench out around it if there was any indication it was going to rain. And then if you touch it on the inside, the thing would leak. You would get a shower.
Yeah.
You know, they wasn't very good, but they were shelters. We used to on that Bollinger farm, we used to pick tomatoes during the day, and at night market, or go to night market at night with them. And you know, like 2 o'clock in the morning, we might walk up and down Baltimore Street in Baltimore. You wouldn't think of doing that now. And I think we would get about 15 cents a basket for the tomatoes.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to say now, I never wore a hat and shirt out there, and now I have a problem with skin cancer, and they tell me that's where it came from.
Yeah. Now you used to do you pick the crops here in the county and take them down to Baltimore?
To Baltimore.
To night market?
Night market,
Okay, and how would you get down to Baltimore?
They had a big truck
okay.
that we would load those tomatoes on, and then go down with one of the truck drivers, whoever. And they also used to go down early in the morning, then like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, with a van type thing, and there would be certain areas down there that they would pick up day workers, and they would come up there and just work during the day.
Yeah, bring them up here to work.
Yeah.
That must have been an adventure to go down to night market. Wow.
It's something you wouldn't do now.
How old were you, Earl? Can you remember?
I would think 13, 14 at the most.
Now tell me about, where was the Bollinger Farm?
The Bollinger Farm is off of Deer Park Road. Well, there was 4 farms actually. One of them is right there on Deer Park, corner of Deer Park and Bollinger Road.
Okay.
By the way, Bollinger Road was dirt, gravel at that time. So was, well, all those side roads around there. Birdview Road, Green Mill Road, Hughes Road, they were all dirt at that time. Wow. But the one corner farm there on Bollinger and Deer Park Road, they had a fruit farm there. They grew peaches, apples, that kind of stuff, and pretty big way at that time.
Yeah.
And
sort of like Boggers today.
Yeah, really.
Okay.
Probably not as big as Balkers, but on that same order. And then the farm that had the tomatoes was the farm that also had the swimming pool.
Now the pool, was that a regular swimming pool? Okay.
It was a rather large pool, big square pool.
Okay.
It had a small diving board, a large diving board, and then a 2-story scaffold. It's a wonder somebody didn't get killed, because we used to dive off of that scaffold down through an old Army raft type thing that had no bottom to it. It was just an outer shell, and we dived down through that thing.
You guys
But I think it was about 10 foot deep on the deep side.
Okay.
But that's, yeah, that's where it's
Now, public was invited to that?
Oh, yes.
Did they
yes.
charge an admission?
Very small charge.
Yeah.
I don't recall just exactly what.
And it was
but
very popular.
oh, yeah. That whole meadow would be full of cars.
No kidding.
Like on a Saturday or Sunday,
Yeah.
for that.
Now, there was also Cascade Lake in the county.
Cascade
Did you ever
Lake.
go to Cascade
I went
Lake?
over there a few times, but not a whole lot.
Well,
Be
this
too
place
far
was,
for the bicycle.
Right, this place was a lot closer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, of course, we also had Frocks up there. They had a big pool.
Okay.
And they had the dance hall. They had shows there, and dances and weddings, all that type thing.
This
They
is
had
at Frocks.
Frocks,
And
Frocks Sunnybrook Farm,
Okay. And where
And-
was that located?
Bond Street,
Okay.
off of Main,
Uh-huh.
and now it's that big senior assisted living place there.
Okay.
Huge place.
And they
But
used to have dances there.
They had dances, they had shows, and I mean, fairly big time bands would come in there occasionally, and it was very nice.
Get a big crowd?
Big crowd.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And as a teenager, did you go in there dancing?
I went in there dancing.
And
Yeah,
kick your
once I
heels
got my
up?
license and all. Yeah,
Okay.
and so anyway, that was another very active place. And back to the farming a little bit here. One time in my life, I'd been fired on the job.
Yeah.
We were picking beans, and they used to come around with a pickup truck, and they'd pick up these kids, and you go pick beans.
Sure.
They're a couple pennies a pound or something. I don't know what, but another kid and I we got funny and started throwing beans at each other. Well, the next morning, the pickup didn't show up for us.
Oh.
So that was a one-day job,
Yeah.
and the only time I ever got fired on the job. But yeah, one of the dumb things I did, I went to church at Trinity Lutheran, where they have the Dutch picnic, which in those days was a big deal because you didn't have other things going on. Right now, when they have the Dutch picnic, there's also the corn roast up in Union Mills, and you have the 4-H fair,
Right.
all this kind of stuff. So it has trimmed down quite a bit. They had the tournament riding there, which was very popular. And then I played in the band, and every time somebody would go through and get 3 rings, well, the band would play.
Okay.
Of course, then we had our regular concert.
Now talk about the tournament a little bit, because that's fascinating. That's actually the Maryland state sport, isn't it?
It is.
Okay. And you don't get to see it very much
No,
anymore.
they quit doing it there.
Called jousting, right?
Jousting,
Okay. And so how did it work?
Well, like I say, the big timers,
Yeah.
I'll say, they had special outfits they wore, and they had this big long pole with a pointy thing on the end of it, and then there would be 3 arches, and they would ride their horse up through these arches and try to get a ring on the end of these poles. There was 3 different ones they would go through, and it would start out a larger size but get down very small.
Right.
And then anytime anyone got 3 rings, whether it be the large or the small, the band would play.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then we always had our concert there too.
Now, how old were you then?
How old? Here again, I would say between 14 and 16.
Okay.
Yeah. This.
So, Earl, you're a musician.
Uh-huh.
And tell me about how you started playing music. What got
Okay.
you going?
When I was 13, 14 years old, my parents bought me a used trombone.
Okay.
And I was in the high school band and orchestra. I took music lessons at the high school, 15 minutes a week or something. I mean, very little.
Yeah.
And then I started taking lessons from Norman Myers, one of the old Myers band gentlemen. And I took private lessons from him for a little while. And then all of a sudden I decided I knew it all, and I quit that. But anyway, that got me started into a lot of things there. We had, in my younger days, the Arbol Orchestra, Noy Arbol from out in Baltimore Valley. He had an orchestra. We used to practice in the old barber shop beside the Stone House there on Liberty Street.
Okay.
And we would play once a month at the Alms House.
Now,
which
the Stone House on Liberty Street, that's O'Lorden's now, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
But we was next door to that.
Okay.
The building's no
Building's
longer
not
there.
there,
It's a
yeah.
parking lot now.
Right.
But we would go out to the Alms House and play for the poor people one month or one Sunday a month, And the almshouse, of course, is where the Farm Museum is now. It's that big building. When you go into the front, off to the left, they had a music room there.
Okay.
And they had their services there and that sort of thing. And then the Methodist Men's Club of the Methodist Church there at Main Street and Center, they would have us play for them for their little get-together once a month. Okay. And then we would play around for picnics, church picnics and stuff like that. And there's only 2 of us left out of that group.
No kidding.
There was probably 6 or 8 in the group.
Okay. And
right now, there's a lady, Mary, and I can't think of her last name. She's still living, and she's out at the Carlucan Village. And Herbert, Wade Herbert's wife. Okay. He was a jeweler in town, had a jewelry store. Well, his wife played violin. Okay. And the 2 of us are the only ones left.
So what was the instrumentation of this orchestra?
Okay, we had 3 or 4 violins, I think a cello, a saxophone, trombone, and I believe a trumpet, something like that, you know. Yeah. But
and what kind of music did you play?
Music that you never hear anymore now. I can't really just remember exactly what. I think there was a few marches and overture type things, you know, and that sort of thing.
Some waltzes?
But waltzes, I'm sure, waltzes, yeah,
okay.
Really.
So music that you would sit and listen to, but you could dance to, I imagine.
Yeah, but we never played for a dance. But I you know, like the waltz or something like that, they probably could. Yeah. But yeah, I had a few years with that, and like I said, the high school band and orchestra. The high school band would go and play at football games whenever possible. If they couldn't go, we formed we called it a Novelty Band. And there was about 4 or 5 of us in that, and we would go to play the away football games that the big band couldn't go. Okay. Well, after school, that grew into a regular German band.
No kidding.
We had regular German outfits, the works, I mean, actually from Germany. Wow. One of the guys, actually, he was the manager of the band, and should I mention names?
Sure. That's
okay.
Fine,
the Humber Boys in Westminster. Well, the oldest one is the one, he moved to Bel Air, and he was kind of manager of the group. Right. And Dave Browning played tuba, and of course I played trombone. Dick Humphrey played trumpet. And then there was another, well, Larry Mars, I believe, played clarinet for a little while with him. Right. And then when Bill moved to Bel Air, then there was a dentist up there, a young fellow who became a dentist, who played clarinet with Bill. And those 2 could play that clarinet polka, believe me.
Really?
Very good. But we had a great time with that. We used to play a lot of Oktoberfests, particularly up around there. We played at the mall up there, and they would have Bavarian dance groups and stuff like that, and we would be part of that every fall. We played for a couple of weddings. We played for political events. We played for just, well, anything that came along, you know. Well, of course, when Bill passed away, too young, I mean, and too sudden, it kind of folded. That was the end of it. And but then we had another German band group out of the Westminster band. Well, let me go back a little further than that. I played with Myers's band for 5 years. Okay. And Joni Kibler, one of the Westminster band guys, he came to me one time, or give me a call, phone, I guess, and he says, we need another trombone. We have a parade in Hagerstown. I think it was Halloween maybe or something. He says, how about giving us a hand? So I did. They fit me up with the uniform, and I went with them. And when we got back, he said, now, anytime Myers's doesn't have something going on, and we do, you'd like for you to come and join us. Well, I did both for a couple of years, and it got to be a little much. So then I went over to the Westminster Band. And, of course, I've been there ever since.
Now, what year would this have been? About what time?
Here again, I was about 14 years old with Myers's.
Right.
And then, like I say, 3 or 4 years later, you know, I transferred over to Westminster completely.
So are we talking the 50s then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. Early 50s.
So how big was the Myers Band at that time?
pretty good-sized band and a good band. It was a great concert band. They didn't parade quite as much as like the Westminster did, but they had a really good concert band. Ed Gobrick out of Hanover was director, and he was very good. And I can remember some of the church concerts. He and his brother would come down from Hanover, and they would do some kind of a German thing, you know, and act and playing all together. You know, that was kind of fun. But with Mars's, yeah, I played mostly church picnics and stuff like that, and parades and whatever. Right. And then when I got into the Westminster Band full time, well, I've been with them now, I think, about 50 years next year.
Wow, that's amazing.
And of course, the Westminster Band goes to Ocean City every year. That's coming up here in a couple of weeks.
Sure is.
And back in the 60s, or even earlier than that, I guess the late 50s, there was a bus company in Pleasant Valley, Smith Transport or something like that. The band would hire a bus from them, and if they had their own driver, it was cheaper. So Tommy Diffendahl used to drive the bus for us. At that time, the band paid for everything. We had 3 big meals a day, the lodging, the bus down, the whole bit, even some spirits and soda and that sort of thing. But yeah, we used to have a lot of fun with that. One night that we were down there, we would go on the boardwalk and have a pajama parade, and it was actually a pajama parade. We would get in our pajamas and parade down the boardwalk, and as we would come to a light on the boardwalk, we'd stop and play a number, and then move on to the next one. And then we had, at that time, they had a band shell out on the beach, a nice one, and we had some very nice concerts out there. And then the 60s come along with the hippies and so forth, and they burned the band shell down. We had to stop having the parade on the boardwalk because they would come up and ram their hand into the bell of your horn or throw things into it, run around through the band. The color guard would try to keep this from happening. They would surround us, but yeah, they ruined it. They had to discontinue it. Now they still have what they call a pajama parade up at the convention center, but it's not the same. I mean, it's kind of a contest thing for them, and they have fun with it. But
it's still fun.
It's fun, but it's not the pajama parade that we knew back in that time. Yeah. But then there was a German band that kind of formed out of the Westminster Band also, and particularly at Ocean City, we would play for the hospitality houses, Carroll County, Baltimore County, the crab feed, that kind of stuff. And sometimes we'd have our own little jam session on the boardwalk in front of the hotel, that sort of thing. So we had a lot of fun with that. And the Patriots Drum and Bugle Corps, I was a member of that. That was, I think at the time, sponsored by the VFW, because I know we used to rehearse in the upstairs part of the VFW building, and that would have been back in the late 50s, I believe, too. So I was with them for a few years, and they broke up, and it became the Starlighters, which was a junior drum bugle corps. And I don't know what happened there, but that eventually broke up, too. Let's see if we've covered all the bands here. I think so. So
you still play your trombone, though?
Still play the trombone, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I became 18, you know, I started out with this used trombone at about 14. And when I became 18, my parents bought me a new Olds trombone. And that is the trombone that I use today.
No
the same one. Yep, it's been a good one. I bought another, actually more expensive trombone at a yard sale a few years ago, and just never could break it in, or it couldn't break me in or something, I don't know. But I never cared for it, and I donated that to the Westminster Band. So I'm back to my 18-year-old trombone, and it don't look too good anymore. I had it reconditioned a couple of times, but it's ready for it again, but I'm not sure I'm ready for it either. So, but it is the same one that I used in high school.
And it works fine.
Works fine. It's just that the one on the other end of the mouthpiece doesn't do much anymore for it. I played for the dedication of the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and I was also one of the ones who, my area was part of Deer Park Road. We went and got pledges from people
Mm-hmm.
to support the hospital when they were building it.
Right.
And like I say, I played for that. And when I was in high school, a couple of times there was WTTR had a program, Chat with Gladys,
Mm-hmm.
Gladys Weimert, and she'd just have different people on and talk to them. I guess similar probably to this, but I can remember being on with her a few times there, talking about the Westminster High School band
Right.
and what was going on there and that sort of thing. So that was kind of fun too. Okay, we've covered Ocean City. Oh, one more thing with the band. Back in the 50s and 60s, no females.
Mm.
They did not allow females in the band because, mainly because of Ocean City
Right.
and the lodging part, I guess, and that sort of thing. Well, that changed then later on in the 60s. Thank goodness it did, because we have some excellent musicians in the band now, female, and of course our director Sandy does an excellent job with the band.
Does indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it's different now. These school kids, it's different from when I was at school, because we didn't have as much training to begin with.
Right.
And you know, I came in, I'll say, as an old faker, where now those kids are musicians.
Yes.
They really do good, and the band has really improved
Mm-hmm.
as a result of this. We're still looking for youth.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that would be interested, you know, a little commercial here.
Sure.
We reheared down on John Street, the old Plumber building there. We have our own band hall now,
Right.
and we rehearse on Monday nights through the winter, and anybody's welcome.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun thing, a family thing, and we have a very good time, as you know, because
I do
you've
indeed.
played with them here.
Yes, indeed.
And with this building, we have that old 36 or 38 Chevy wagon,
Mm-hmm.
station wagon type thing that we haul the equipment in. We have a garage for that there, and all, so it's worked out very good.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to climb up the second floor, you know, to get our instruments and stuff like that. And since I haven't been able to march now for a few years because of arthritis and this sort of thing, I had a hip replacement, but now I do get to drive that band truck in the parades every now and then.
Great.
So that's kind of fun. I enjoy that.
So the band has evolved. In the 50s, it was a men-only organization.
Yes,
and
indeed.
now it's male and female.
Yeah.
And how old do you have to be before you can join the band?
I think they had a restriction of about 14
Okay.
at one time,
Mm-hmm.
but I think now it's more or less height.
Okay.
You know, if you're got
If you can wear the uniform.
right,
Okay.
more or less, yeah. So yeah, they have 'em. It's not all that strict, I don't believe
And
anymore.
about how many members do you have? 40 to 50, would you say?
I think 50 to 60,
Okay, 50 to 60
and maybe 40 to
members.
50 active.
Right,
But you have different ones coming to different jobs. I mean,
Sure.
there's everybody can't make them all.
right.
But
And you do a dozen or so concerts a year, but then you also do about every carnival parade, don't you? in
all the
community?
carnival
All
parades
the
for
carnival
local.
parades. Mhm.
And of course, I don't think we'll have one in Tonytown this year again because they got the road tour up.
Right.
But yeah, we do that kind of stuff, and
You do two or
It's-
three 4th of July parades.
yeah,
Yeah.
the same day.
Yeah.
And then, but you know, a senior band has almost become a thing of the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Carroll County and Westminster actually approves what they have here as
Right.
much as they should.
It's a gem.
It is.
It
I
really
mean,
is.
it's almost a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that, you know, when I was still parading in particular, you go down Main Street in Westminster, and I don't want to be negative, but it's the way it is, you know. It's kind of quiet. You'll get a clap once in a while. But you go into Baltimore County, Delaware, Pennsylvania, which the band does a lot of now.
Right.
And you have hollering, clapping, and carrying on
Cheering.
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could say, you know, Westminster has something here that, you know, I hope they appreciate. I'm sure they do, but
I tell you, when I see the green and gold coming down the street, it always makes me feel proud.
yeah.
It's just wonderful to have that band in our community.
Have an excellent color guard.
Yep.
Yeah,
best.
they do a
lot
great
of
job
pride.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We'll get into the work situation maybe a little bit.
Okay.
My father, as I mentioned, I believe earlier, was a small-time cattle dealer, and he, of course, bought and sold cattle and stuff all the time. I can remember Tuesday was always the big auction day for him on John Street, and it was a fairly big affair at the time, but we always had to go to the auction on Tuesday. And then, lost my train of thought here.
Now, when you went to the auction, what did they auction? Was it just farm animals, or was it like
mostly just farm animals? Okay. I think occasionally they had eggs and some fruit or something maybe, but mostly just farm animals.
Because I know at the auctions now they'll do everything. I mean, they have,
right.
When a farm's being sold, they'll have all the implements and tools and stuff, but also they do. You can go and auction hay and grain and whatever. I mean,
yeah, that one out on New Windsor Road,
they stay real busy.
Pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing I recall on, I think I'm sure it was a daily thing on Liberty Street, Coons Creamery was out there. And the farmers used to line up almost to Main Street sometimes with their trucks. They would have a pickup truck with a couple 10-gallon tanks on it, but they brought their milk in there to be processed at Coons Creamery. And the railroad situation now, I know most of my family's from up around New Windsor, and I know that was one of the big stops to pick up milk on the railroad. They used to haul it into Baltimore from there. The farmers used to bring it in. And
that was every day.
Every day on that, yeah. And the train also had a mail car on it, like a little post office. And Medford was a general merchandise type place, off of the New Windsor Road. And it was probably similar to one of our shopping centers now, because they carried all kind of stuff.
No kidding.
They had a big cage that they had a monkey in there, just for a little rainy day. And I used to go there a lot. My father used to haul kerosene also, and we used to go there to get our kerosene. And I was known as the chocolate ice cream boy for that, because we used to go out there quite a bit. And then, of course, where you turn off New Windsor Road to go back into where that used to be, there's a big spring there. Everybody would stop there and get spring water. In fact, now I have a motorhome which I cover with a big tarp, and I tie it down in the winter with gallon jugs, like milk jugs, filled with that spring water.
No kidding.
I have 40-some jugs that I fill, and that, I pay from water, but I can go out there and get it, and we do that every year.
No kidding.
But back to the mail situation now on the train, I can remember there, and also the railroad station, the freight station here in Westminster, just down from Johansson's. Well, they had some kind of gadget, arm thing or whatever, that would stick out, and they would hang this mail bag on that. And as the train went through, it didn't stop. It grabbed onto this mail bag, and then they processed the mail on the way, I guess, to Baltimore. That sort of thing.
Right while they were going. I'll be darned.
Yeah, that was kind of neat. And then, of course, we used to have that real nice train station that they tore down.
Now, that train station did a lot of passengers, didn't it?
A lot of passengers, right. And also, that's where the newspapers came in. The newspaper carriers boys used to come in there to, they'd pick up and then go around and hand deliver around town.
Okay.
So
that was on Main Street and thereabouts.
Railroad Avenue,
Tell me what Main Street was like, Earl.
It was quite different from these days. Well, before we get completely onto that, they had a big gate that would cross Main Street to stop the traffic when one of the trains was coming through. And it had a handle on that you would turn the handle, which allowed that gate to go up and down. So that's what we had instead of red lights and flashing lights and all that kind of thing.
So it was hand operated?
Hand operated. There was just a small little shack, something to get in out of the weather, you know, and there was always somebody on duty there. And
so somebody that worked for the railroad, a watchman, was there to keep an eye, and when a train was coming through,
when you hear the whistle coming up the hill there, well, he would come out and put the gate down.
But I imagine he was a pretty busy guy, because you had a lot of trains coming
at that time. There's quite a few trains, freight trains, hold a lot of coal and that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
That you had mentioned Main Street. Now, Saturday night, big time on Main Street. I mean, from, I'll say, Longwell Avenue up to at least John Street. Wall-to-wall people.
No kidding.
They would come in there and, here again, talk about their crops and their animals and that kind of stuff. And now, in my case, I usually came to town with the neighbor boys, and they would take us to the movies. I always went to State Theater because that's where the cowboy movies, Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, that kind of stuff that I enjoyed there. Now, my sister, she would go up to the Carroll Theater because they had their old love stories and things like that. But, yeah, and I think for about a quarter, you would see a movie and some popcorn. And then they had what they called a serial movie every week, where they would show you a portion of some kind of show, and then it would all stop at a very interesting area, and they would try to get you to, of course, come back the next week to see some more of it.
The cliffhanger. Leave you hanging. So
yeah, that's it. Yeah. But yeah, Main Street. I was working at Eddie's Supermarket, and I can remember being up in Reed's Restaurant, which was across from the Catholic Church, and that would have been back in the 50s when the Catholic Church steeple blew off. I was there at Reed. The storm went through, and I was in there having lunch at Reed's when that happened.
And the storm came through town.
Took the big steeple off.
Took the steeple right off the church.
Yep.
And where did it end up?
It came down, if I remember correctly, kind of in front of the church.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. Did anybody get hurt, or do you recall?
Not that I recall. No.
Wow.
But
amazing.
It was kind of sad because that was a beautiful church.
Yeah.
And but it took it off. While I'm on Eddie's Supermarket, that was down where Hagee's Sports Shop was, and the Hagee's Sports Shop's the one that burned out.
Okay.
But once I got my license to drive, I used to come in, and Eddie's Supermarket had a brand new GMC oversized van, and I used to come in there in the morning for school, take that down to Park Avenue, I think, in Baltimore, and pick up a load of produce, and then come back and just park it. I never had to unload it and just go on to school.
Right.
And I did the same thing when I was 14 years old with my father, here again, to feed the hogs in particular. They called it slop. We got it there from the distillery here in Westminster and also down Gwynbrook. But 2 days a week in the afternoon, I would get out of school a couple hours early and drive the truck with him to these two areas to get the slop. No license, but I had permission to do it.
Yeah, farm truck. Now, you mentioned the distillery. That's right on what's now Distillery Drive, right on Liberty Street.
Right on there.
Tell me about the distillery.
Same one, distillery. Well, they of course made whiskey, and this was some type of a byproduct from that. And I think they bottled it and everything right there.
Right.
Yeah, but
right next to the train station.
Right next.
So they could send it all over the country. Okay.
And before I forget this, I wasn't going to get away from Eddie's quite yet, but I don't want to forget this. Also with the trains, they hauled hogs and cattle in, and right across from that distillery area, they used to unload them and drive them up Liberty Street to the Myerses.
No kidding.
To their butchering place up there.
Yeah.
Drive them up, just
right up
no
right
horses, but
yeah,
just drive them right up the street to there. Yeah. Well, let's see. Back to Eddie's. I was there until they closed the store. They offered me a job in Catonsville, and I didn't want to drive that far, so they surprised us one Saturday night and told us that this was it. And then Monday I went over to Myers's, and their local driver had just quit. So I was out of Eddie's on Saturday night and went to work for Myers's on Monday. So it was a quick change over there.
You didn't get much of a vacation.
Not much of a vacation. But I had local delivery, and at that time they delivered around over Westminster. And, you know, it was not unusual to take a half a loaf of bread here or a quart of milk over there, that sort of thing. And then, of course, a lot of them, they got their whole order for the week.
Yeah.
From Myers's, and had it delivered.
Wow.
And that I was there when I bought my first car, 46 Chevy. Paid about $200 for it, and I practically did without eating to pay for that car.
No kidding.
And so that's where the automobile part of it started. I bought it right down here on Green Street, where United Used Car is now. That was Zepp's or somebody's at the time, you know.
I bet you wish you still had that car.
Oh, I have several. When I got rid of that, and I got a 49 Ford convertible. Loved to have that. I had a 55 Mercury hardtop convertible, they called them at the time, and really liked to have that one. And then from there I had several in the middle, but I also had a Mercury, 59 Mercury Turnpike Cruiser. They had the long skirts on the back and all this, you know, push button drive.
Yes.
Yeah, that was excellent car. I'd love to have any of those right now. So anyway, after Myers's, I worked at Congolium at their lab office for a couple of years till I went into service. I had 6 years with the Army Reserve. And I can remember a couple of times hitchhiking home from Fort Knox. You wouldn't think of doing something like that now either.
Not today.
But I'll guarantee you, if you had a military uniform on, you was guaranteed a ride. They would pick you up right away, you know.
They
and
were very patriotic.
Yeah, that's for sure. So after my 6 months there, I went to work for Black & Decker back in about '59, and 75 cents an hour.
Now that's Black & Decker right here.
Black & Decker in Hampstead.
Hampstead,
yeah. And I saw the building being added to all through the years on that, and it was a great place to work in the '60s because they had good benefits, you know. And it was kind of funny. Once a year, Union would try to get in, and they'd be out along the road when you leave in the evening, passing out papers and that kind of stuff. Well, we never did join the Union, but every time that happened, and like I say, about once a year, excuse me, we would we'd get a benefit out of it. They would give you an increase or some insurance deal or something like that. So we always benefited out of it. And it was a good company. I worked in Hampstead there in the beginning for a while. I had 10 years in Towson. I had about 10 years in Hunt Valley. When Black & Decker bought out DeWalt, I would go to Lancaster a couple times a month. We were trying to get them set up, you know, the Black & Decker way.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was good. I ended up with almost 40 years with Black & Decker. And well, there we go. Where are we here now? Let's back up a little bit to Trinity Lutheran Church. I remember there the regular church services. It was German originally, I think. In the regular church services, you had all the men sit on one side of the church and all the women on the other.
No kidding.
And that I really remember that going on, and had a little balcony up in the back there where we had catechism and that sort of thing. And of course, the picnic was a big item at the time.
Now, were there a lot of people here when you were a child who spoke German?
No, I wouldn't say a lot. No, but I think that's how it all got started. I skipped one area here in the working. I guess that would have been after Myers's, we had Cocky's Drive-In out here. Now that's where the high school is right now.
Okay.
Big drive-in theater, very nice. And I worked there for a little while in the concession stand, and that got me free movies. Never had to pay for the movie. After the intermission, when the concession stand business was over, I got free meals, like hamburgers or whatever, you know. And I dated the boss's daughter. So what more could you ask for? I mean, I had it made. So that went on for, go ahead.
We had a drive-in movie in Westminster.
Oh, yeah.
I bet you most people don't even realize that.
Yeah, right. It's right where the high school is now.
Right where the high school is now, okay?
Yeah.
And can you remember what kind of movies did you see? When would this have been? In the 60s?
Probably more 50s.
In the 50s,
Yeah.
okay. Can you remember any of the movies you saw?
Not too many. I was.
Oh, that's right. You were working.
No, they just regular movies at the time,
Okay.
westerns and I'm sure some love stories and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And I imagine it was very popular.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
yeah, the place would fill up.
No.
You drive in. Of course, you'd stay in your car and drive up on this little hump.
Right.
Then you had a speaker that you would hang in your window.
Right.
And it was kind of nice. I don't know why. I mean, some families, they used to come in like a pickup truck,
Right.
have chairs sitting in the back of the truck
Yeah.
for the kids
And
that
back
sort of
up,
thing.
yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know why it never continued.
Yeah.
Same, we had one at Monocacy outside of Tonytown.
Okay.
Same thing.
That field is still there.
The field's still there,
yeah.
but the movie
Yeah.
course isn't.
Right. Yeah.
And then Liberty had one down here below Eldersburg.
Okay.
But
Now, did they show movies just on the weekends, or was it
no, every day.
every day?
Uh huh.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Summertime.
Uh huh.
A great way to have family
Oh,
entertainment
yeah.
in summer.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And now you had a drive-in movie in Westminster, and 3 movie theaters?
2.
2 movie theaters.
State and Carroll.
State and Carroll.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so movies were a big thing in Carroll County.
Yeah.
Big entertainment.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
Wow.
And well, like I say, I worked there for a few years and had a pretty good setup.
Now that's just up the street from where Hoffman's is now. Was Hoffman's there?
Yes,
Okay.
but when Hoffman started, it was a garage, service garage. They worked
Okay.
on, Mr. Hoffman worked on cars
Okay.
in the basement, and he had this small ice cream shop at the top.
No kidding.
Well, that burned out
Okay.
at one time, and then when they rebuilt it, it was strictly the ice cream.
Okay.
But our school bus driver, the last day of school every year, would stop at Hoffman's, and he bought us all an ice cream cone
No kidding.
from Hoffman's.
Yeah. What a nice treat.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a great guy.
Times have changed.
And then we had AAA patrol at that time, and I was a patrolman, and you more or less just stood up front, and well, the kids were good. I mean, you didn't have a lot of problem with it. And then once a year in the spring before school let out, all school patrolmen was taken to Washington for a little outing, a little trip over there. I remember going over there, and like the Washington Monument, we would walk up and ride down, and then ride up and walk down.
No kidding.
And strictly riding now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Haven't been over there for a few years, but yeah, that was kind of nice too. And, well, here, well, let's see, it's a little further down the road in Carroll Lutheran, or not Carroll Lutheran, the college, community college. Now that was my uncle's farm.
No kidding.
That was built on his farm.
Right.
And then I had another uncle's farm. He lost his to Liberty Reservoir down below Eldersburg. That wiped that all out.
Yeah.
But, okay. Okay, well, I can remember, I said I started out at Black & Decker 75 cents an hour, and I can remember when I reached $1 an hour. Big money at that time. Really doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after retirement there, I worked for about 8 years with Carroll Transit, which is now CATS, Carroll Area Transit System, and worked there 2 days a week. And that was a good way to kind of wean out from retiring, and I enjoyed that. But with the heavy traffic we have around here now, it kind of got steered away from it there. Okay, my mother, she worked at clothing factory here in town.
Okay.
I think it's Westminster Knit, which is, I'm not sure what it is out there now, but the old Coca-Cola building.
Okay.
And she also worked at the shoe factory there on Green Street. That was a big deal at the time. And they were referred to as sweatshops because, of course, no air conditioning and very, very hard work. And then where where Zion's, the restaurant is, well, that was Maggie's Lawn. And it was an elderly lady, had both legs off. And I can remember my mother, we would stop in there to get the newspaper in the evening and buy a newspaper from her. And nice restaurant now, but of course Maggie's long gone.
Yeah. We had a lot of manufacturing in Westminster and in Carroll County in the 40s and 50s and 60s. There were a lot of things going on, a lot of employment in the area. You mentioned the Coca-Cola plant. That was a working Coca-Cola bottling plant
at that time.
Yeah.
And then a lot of pea vineries around too, where they, in the summertime, that was always a good place for kids to get a job for a little while. Now my mother, like I said, she worked at those two areas mainly, and then of course had the home gardening and that kind of stuff. And she was the oldest of 15 children. Another little comical story here, I guess you would say, but well, the farmers at that time, they had big families because the boys would help on the farm and that sort of thing. Well, in my grandparents' case, 15, but one boy. All the rest were girls. And now the little story here that I was always told, after about 7 or 8 girls, they were told, now if the next one is a girl, give it a boy's name. Well, guess what? I had an Aunt John.
No kidding.
And an Uncle Bub. Now, whether he followed right behind, I'm not sure about that, but that was always the story I was told. But I really did. I had an Aunt John. And back in I think the 20s, she and her husband went on a trip to California in an old Model T Ford or something like that and never returned. They loved it out there. Now, they would visit, but they moved out completely.
I'll be darned.
But that was Aunt John. And then my mother, being the oldest of all these kids, and it was hard times in those days, like World War, what have you, and she raised several of them herself. Because my mother was previously married, and her husband died. They had their own farm, and her husband died when he was in his late 30s, I believe, heart attack. And then my father had the same situation with his wife, who had cancer and died young in life. And then, of course, my mother and father, and I was the only one by second marriage. But each of them had children by first marriage. But hunting.
Now, they had grown up during the Depression. So in those days, everything was about conservation. You conserved everything. You didn't waste a thing.
No. And I remember with the butchering, they cold packed their meats because you didn't have a freezer.
Right.
And that was good. It was a good meal, I tell you.
Can you talk about that a little bit? You mentioned you grew up in a cabin that did have electricity. So did you have a refrigerator?
We did when I was old enough to remember about it. Now whether we did when we first went down, I'm not sure. I think they had an ice box at one time, which probably, the reason I think I remember that is because I was getting older and it was about time they switched over to refrigerator and all. But there was an ice box at the time, and they, right out here across from the Coca-Cola, Westminster, that area, there was an ice house. And you used to go in there and buy ice by the block. Right. And put it in the top of this ice box, and that's where they kept their milk and stuff cool. And then another area for that, I can remember one neighbor farm in particular. Well, a lot of the farms had springs, and that was used also to for keep milk cool and that kind of stuff.
So if you had a spring, you dig out a spring cellar and keep your stuff in there because
Right.
it kept it around 55, 60,
And then-
below 60 degrees.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And this one farmer, the spring house wasn't too far from their home, and he had a real small hand pump in his kitchen. And he would pump water out of that spring into the house.
Boy,
and
that's
use it that way.
fancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, right in the house.
Right in the house with his spring water. He was all right, I'll
That's
tell you.
pretty good, yeah. So you started to tell about hunting.
Okay, yeah, when I was young, I used to go squirrel hunting, rabbit hunting a good bit. Never got into the big stuff. But you can't do that now because all these areas are built up. They're
Right.
with these housing developments and that kind of
Too
stuff.
many houses, yeah.
And in my case, it's just as well because if I would shoot a squirrel, I felt sorry for it. And it just never became a big thing with me. Although I did do the squirrel and rabbit, and my mother used to fix squirrel pie and
Sure.
fried rabbit
Yep.
and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You supplemented your diet with what you could get in the woods. Yeah.
And this uncle that the farm is now the community college, they raised domestic rabbits and sold them. And of course they'd have us up once in a while for dinner or whatever. And I can remember they had us up for dinner one Sunday, and she had fixed rabbit.
Yeah.
My father would not eat any kind of wild game like that. And to eat a rabbit or a squirrel, as far as he's concerned, you was eating a rat or something.
Yeah.
He just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
They tried to convince him that it was chicken meat, but he didn't fall for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they used to raise quite a few rabbits there.
Now, did you also fish?
Did some fishing, just the little jobbies down in the creek.
Yeah.
But I think I said earlier there, we would actually fix them and eat them.
Yeah.
And well, here, let's go a little further here with the Boy Scouts. Now, we used to take it's like turnips, maybe potatoes, carrots, that kind of stuff out of the garden.
Right.
And your bacon would not be sliced bacon as you buy it in the store. It'd be a big chunk bacon. And we'd take a hunk of it. And when we used to the Boy Scouts, and we would fix kind of a stew out of that with that chunk of bacon and a few vegetables.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
I bet it
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
And another thing we used to do was cut a stick, maybe an inch thick or whatever, and we would have Bisquick maybe or something, the flour,
Right.
and we would make it moist and make a dough out of it,
Right.
wrap it around this stick, and kind of bake it over an open fire,
Right.
and then stuff it with like Velveeta cheese or something, or
Oh,
some
no
kind of cheese
kidding.
at the time. Yeah, but that was another,
A little
I guess,
treat.
dessert time thing.
Yeah.
That we did in the Scouts.
I'll be done.
Yeah. Of course, fast food was unheard of.
Right.
We had Bulkers,
Sure.
and we still have Bulkers.
We
They
do
still
indeed.
do well.
And it's
Yeah.
awfully good, isn't
Yep,
it?
it
Yes,
sure
it
is. Yeah, and their prices are right, that
Yes,
sort
they
of
are.
thing.
Good home cooking. So no microwaves.
No microwaves.
No. Well, you didn't have a telephone in your house, did you?
Well, not in the beginning.
Not in the beginning.
But
yeah.
in my latter years, I can remember that because it was the big old box that hung on the wall,
Okay.
and you had party line.
Okay.
2 rings would be maybe for you, and 3 rings would be the neighbor across the street. And ours might be 6 rings.
So you
Just
would
turns of the
actually
handle.
crank the handle
crank-
and make the ring.
Crank the handle, it would ring, and so many cranks would be a different person. And I think they had like 6 party lines or something like that.
Okay.
And we had an elderly lady down the road. I mean, you pick up the phone, if somebody's on, you heard them.
Sure.
You know, and that was her entertainment.
Yeah. To listen in on everybody
She would
else's
listen in on the guy,
conversations.
and we knew she was on there.
Okay. Now.
And sometimes she might even join in on the conversation.
That's
but,
funny. Now, so when you had to make a call, say you were calling down to Baltimore, and you wanted to talk to, if you wanted to call Aunt John in California, how would you do that?
Okay, I think at that time you would make one long ring,
Okay.
which would get you an operator
Okay.
here in town,
Right.
and then they would
Ask you to make a connection, and
they would
we
connect
make
you
the
to
connection.
wherever. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
So how about calling across town? Now you had the party line, that was your 6 people, so you could ring them. But if you needed to call across town to somebody else, if you were calling to the grocery store, let's say.
Anything beyond your party line, I
Right.
think, would be through the operator.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the girls that I graduated with was an operator. She just passed away recently, Millie Brewer.
Yeah.
And yeah, she was an operator at the time.
So no cell phones.
No cell phones.
No car phones.
Just the big old phone hanging
Yeah.
on the wall.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
In fact, I have one of those that a fellow that worked for the telephone company bought from. I bought it from him for $10. He got it from the coal mining country up in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And I did something stupid.
Yeah.
I've kicked myself so many times. Where we lived at the time, I had a club room, and there was just a panel wall type
Right.
thing. And these things were very heavy.
Yeah.
And I took everything out of it
Yeah.
so that it wouldn't fall off the
Yeah.
wall.
Right.
I didn't even keep the magnets and stuff, you
Yeah.
know. So the phone is not worth anything now.
Yeah.
And it would probably have some pretty good value otherwise.
Oh well.
So you do dumb things.
Yes, you do. But that's okay. You still got the box.
Still got the box. Yeah, it
Okay.
looks nice.
I bet it does.
Because I redid the woodwork on it and all that
Good,
sort of thing.
good.
The airport out there, of course, was grass in back in the 50s. And I had a buddy whose father was a boss at the Gas and Electric, and he had his own plane, Piper Cub. I think it seated the pilot and +2 or something like that.
Okay.
But they used to take me up quite a bit in that. We'd fly up to Hanover or something like that, or out around Thurmont. But it didn't happen when I was with them, but they came in there one time and the grass was wet, and I think it was even some muddy areas or something, and this little plane had fenders on it.
Yeah.
And it accumulated up under there, and finally the wheels didn't go around, flipped him right up on the nose.
No.
And fortunately, he didn't get hurt.
Yeah.
All it did was broke the aerial,
Right.
or not the aerial, the propeller.
Propeller. Yeah.
And I can remember him, that half of the propeller they had in their house there, they fixed it up, you know, to make it look nice, that sort of thing. But yeah, that was, that's all we had for airport at the time. And then there was an old barn that set up there, probably where the animal doctor is now.
Okay.
And we used to, that was a gathering place for recyclable stuff. We used to take recyclables out to that.
Like a swap shop.
Well, you didn't swipe any. You just took
Drop
it out
it
there
off.
to be just to drop
okay.
off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of the landfill, I guess. That
Okay.
did
Now,
with that.
what kinds of things would you take there?
Paper and rags, I believe, and
Okay.
stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And what did we use for a landfill then? Was there a landfill? Was there anything? Because
The farmers had their own. If they had
behind their place, they'd have a place where they just dumped their stuff, and everybody had a barrel, and they burned their own trash.
burn your own trash,
Yeah.
the paper and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the farms were back in that time. They didn't have what they call the contour farming,
Right.
strip farming. Some
Yeah.
of them called. They didn't have that then, and you had huge gutters in some of your fields.
Yeah.
They'd throw the garbage in there.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a friend who, quite a few years ago now, he used to go around and go through all those and collect bottles. He used to get really some nice old medicine bottles and stuff like that. And I've even seen those big enough that they dump a car in there, you know, an old car, and then
Yeah.
throw stuff in over top.
Yeah.
But that was the landfill at the time. And then when he came out with this strip farming, that took care of pretty much all the those type things.
And of course, we didn't throw as much stuff away in those days as we do
No,
now.
you washed your milk bottles,
Yeah.
and your Coke bottles were
Right.
reused
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff, and none of this plastic.
Yeah.
In fact, speaking of the milk here, and back to Kuhn's Creamery, and we had Willow Farm Dairy up in Frizzlesburg. Kuhn's Creamery and Willow Farm used to deliver milk to your home. We had a little insulated box to sit out on the front porch
Right.
when I got married, and I had milk delivered there, and we dealt with Willow Farm, I believe, at the time, and also there was a bakery in Tonytown, Bumgardner's, I think it was. They would deliver bread and pastries and that kind of stuff to your house.
No kidding.
And then Willow Farm, where in Frizzlesburg, where they had their dairy, they also had a restaurant there. and very good milkshakes, and the hot dogs they called doggy in a blanket.
Okay.
And yeah, that was quite a hangout for teenagers still. That was the other thing we did have other than Bulkers, but very, very, very active there. Okay, dancing. Now, I used to go to a lot of dances when I was a kid, once I got my license, and they always had a dance in Taylorsville every Saturday night, a real smokehouse. I mean, it was, you had to cut your way through to get in there.
No
I mean,
kidding.
because smoking was allowed then and all, you know. And then the very nice dance down at Reese Firehouse for teenagers. That was every Friday night. They had country music, good country bands in there. And I always went to that almost every Friday night. And then over the city restaurant in Westminster, they used to have dances. And that's right up from the railroad. It's, let's see, probably the bicycle shop is in the lower part of that.
Right.
And this was up over top. And I used to hand carry meats and stuff over to the city residents from Eddie's Supermarket at the time. But yeah, I could say these dances, I would go to Taylorsville a good bit, always went to Reese, and then once in a while at the city restaurant. I think my sister used to go up to that one more so than I did. And I intended on mentioning this before, that the firehouse, you know, they blew the siren all the time. And they have different signals for that. I mean, a single blast on the siren might be the center of town. 2 might be East End, 3 might be West End. I think 5 was out in the country, out our way. But you could hear that siren and pretty much tell what area.
Where the problem was.
Right.
And it was a volunteer fire department.
Volunteer fire company, all the way at that time. Yeah. And roller skating. My wife was more into the roller skating. I was more into dancing, but we got that together there. But Rainbow Roller Rink up here outside of Tonytown.
Right.
That's where I met my wife. And I could say she was very good. She could skate backwards and do the dance skates and all that kind of stuff. I had trouble going straight. But she held me up, you know.
Good.
And I can remember going up there. Now, she would go like 3 times a week. Her parents, I don't know what it was with her mother, but her mother, she had another sister too, and her mother wouldn't allow them to go to dances. I think it was something to do with religion or something at the time. But roller skating was fine. So she would take them roller skating 3 times a week until I got into the picture. Then I started taking her on Sundays usually, because I still did my dances.
Right.
And after I don't know, a year or so up there, they had this thing going. They had a bet going that she and I would get married. And of course we did back in '61. And they had a old timers skate party up at McSherrystown here. Well, that's probably been 10, 15 years ago. And we decided to go to it because there's a lot of them that we used to skate with. And that was a mistake because I fell. And I was on crutches for 3 days because I had hip replacement and all, you know, and they told me I was very lucky that I didn't do something with that or break another one. So that ended the skating. Don't skate anymore. But then they had one skating rink out here, Tractor Sale or TFC or whatever, and they were building that. Used to be a skating rink here in Westminster. And that was very popular. Why they ever closed that, I don't know, because like I say, it was a popular sport with the kids and give them something to do. And Arcadia also had one over there, and they still do. That one burned out one time, but they rebuilt, and I understand that one's still very active. So, like I say, I met my wife at the skating rink, and if all goes well, we'll have 50 years coming up here next year. 49 in July, and then it'll be 50 years next year. It's been great. I wouldn't have it any other way. We had, well, 4 children actually. We had 2 boys and and then we lost a girl and a boy at birth. And another little story here. I'm full of corn stories, but they had this thing years ago where it's something to do with a button and string, and I forget just exactly what they did, but they told me at Black & Decker, right after we got married, I'm going to end up with 4 children, a boy, a girl, and then 2 boys. And that's exactly what happened.
No kidding.
And of course, my boys now are getting up in the years. They're 40 and 45, I believe, something like that. But yeah, that superstition was big in those days.
Yeah.
My mother, it was terrible because you couldn't walk under a ladder. If you would forget something, have to go back to the house, you had to sit down, count to 10, yeah, all this kind of stuff. And even though I didn't really believe in it, I did it. It was like she would haunt me or something. You know, we had the motorhome in Florida here a few years ago, and I was out walking the dog one morning. Well, if there's a coin laying on the ground, you never pick it up if its tail's up. If its heads are up, you're okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm walking the dog, and I got down to this kind of intersection area, and here's a quarter laying there, and tail's up. Well, it was too much temptation. Picked that quarter up, and believe it or not, when we got back and was ready to leave, an hour or so later, that motorhome would not start. And I blame it on that quarter. Crazy. But anyway, that, yeah, superstitions were something else in those days. We bought our first house out here on Elisha's Church Road, $12,500.
And what year was that?
That would have been, we got married in 61, 2, 3, probably 63 or 64, because we had 2 apartments. We was in Bumgardner's apartment on Green Street for a while, and then Walter Haynes, where the restaurant is, Green or Main and Center.
Right.
That beautiful house there.
Yeah.
We had the first floor of that.
No kidding.
Really, really nice apartment in there. $70 a month, and he paid the utilities.
No kidding.
Had fireplace and you know, that nice bay window where we always put our Christmas tree. That was all.
Wow.
So when the restaurant first opened, the one previous to what's there now, and I saw that, I was coming through town one morning and I saw that, and I thought, man, we have to go in there. So I went back and got my wife. We went in. We had breakfast in our bedroom.
No kidding.
And our second bedroom was the kitchen, and of course the our living room was the big dining room.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, it was. That
Amazing.
brought back some memories.
I bet it did.
Yeah.
Okay, so you bought a house for just over $12,000.
$12,500.
What was your mortgage? Do you remember?
Yeah, that's another good question. I had a uncle who was very good with us, and when we was looking at this house, he was a carpenter and all himself. So when we was looking at this house, he joined us and to check it out because he was going to hold the mortgage for us. And the house was only like 4 years old. Nice rancher. It was very nice. Single car garage, you know, on a half acre. And he took the mortgage for us, and he never really set an amount.
Yeah.
He said, if we could, at least $100 a month. So that's what we usually shot for, and I think we always made it, $100 a month. But then as a little bonus, which he really appreciated, my wife would bake a couple pies.
Yeah.
And when we go visiting to pay,
Sure.
she'd have these pies for him. Well, he loved that.
I bet.
Yeah, but that's unheard of too now, $100 a month. All right, well, I'm running out of breath here a little bit, but I kind of like to close with patriotism again.
Okay.
The flag flying, like we just got through Memorial Day, you didn't really see a lot of flags around, and I think we should have those flags flying, you know, be proud of them. And like I say, here again, when I was marching still, and you come through town, the seniors usually would stand up and all, and now they're there texting or something like that, and I think it's kind of sad. And Well, that's just my thoughts on that. You know, I don't think we honor our military quite as much as we used to. And like I said, when I was in, if you had a uniform on, you was guaranteed a ride.
Yeah.
And we had a girl that worked over the office that wore a Army shirt with sergeant stripes on it. Now, when I was in the service, if you wasn't military, you didn't wear military clothes.
That's right.
And now you see everything. Yeah. And I think it's disrespectful, you know, and it shouldn't be that way. But I guess I'm old-timeish. I don't know.
It's a different world.
You got to get with the times.
I guess.
Yeah.
Well, Earl, you're a musician. You've been playing trombone since you were a teenager.
13.
Okay. What advice would you give to a young man or woman a young lady who was starting off to play a musical instrument, any musical instrument? What advice would you give them?
First of all, I highly recommend it. A lot of fun. I mean, we in the different groups that I was with, we always had a lot of fun. And the Westminster Band right now is a family thing, you know, a lot of fun. Everybody, you protect each other, you know, and that sort of thing. And it's just a great thing to do. I have no regrets. Okay. I made a little money with one of the German bands once in a while, but nothing big time. But sure had a good time with it. A lot of good food some places, you know, and that sort of thing.
Okay, so it's great for camaraderie. Is any other advice that you can give somebody that's starting off? I know it's a little bit hard to do because you have to learn how to play the music, and you've got to practice a little bit, and so you've got to go through that learning piece.
Right.
But the rewards in the end, I guess, are worth it.
It pays off in the end.
Yeah,
yeah, it sure does.
Good.
Yep.
And what do you think, if you had to say, the most profound change that you've seen in Carroll County since you were a child, since you were a young man? The
traffic, probably. Yeah, you know, I can say down Deer Park Road, 3 or 4 cars a day. Everybody knew everybody on Deer Park Road. Everybody looked out for you. You didn't close the windows at night, you know, because there's no air conditioning.
Right.
You didn't lock the house. You might let the keys in the car. If somebody got sick, they was right there ready to help you. And now, like out here on 140, I mean, it's like there's no rush hour. It's all the time. I mean, it's just solid cars. It makes you wonder, where is everybody going? Doesn't anybody work? You know, it's just... So I would say probably. I can remember 140 being built, and, you know, to think of that traffic going through Main Street of Westminster now, well, it just... it stands still.
Yeah, we stand still. Yeah.
It's... So yeah, I really like the area. I have no desire to move. I like the bay. We camp, and we've been camping 40-some years. We started out. I tent camped when I was a teenager. My wife never did any camping, and the only restriction was I'm not going to be sleeping on the ground. So I went out and I bought a little 14-foot travel trailer to pull behind the car. Took a big chance on it there, and we went to Gettysburg Campground. And coming home, she was planning the next trip. She loved it.
Good.
And today, she would get rid of me before she'd get rid of that motorhome, probably.
No kidding.
But yeah, we went through several trailers over the years, and then when the arthritis set in, I had trouble stooping and hooking up and all that. Then we went to the motorhome. And that works out pretty good. And we camp someplace almost every month from April through October, I guess. We start out with a group that we do what we call a spring fling in April at Gettysburg, and then in May we kind of skip because I always go down to visit relatives in Williamsburg without the camper. And then June, it's the Ocean City with the band.
Right.
And since I can't march anymore, I feel guilty with them paying my way, so I take the motor home now, and the wife and the granddaughter go along, and we still get to do a couple things with the band, you know, and enjoy it.
You have your concerts.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still have the concert on the boardwalk,
Mm-hmm.
right down 27th Street, where
Yeah.
the end of the train is.
Yeah.
And then, let's see, July, for probably 40-some years, we go down to Cherrystone, which is at the point of the peninsula where the Bay Bridge Tunnel goes into Norfolk.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's a huge campground there, and usually a couple of boats in the group,
Yeah.
and fishing, crabbing, you know, the whole bit. The
Chance to get away.
Oh, yeah, it's great. And it's level, so I can still ride my bike.
Mm-hmm.
Usually go swimming every day.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that works out real well. Then August, if we're going to do any kind of big trip, with or without the motorhome, it's usually August. Now this year, hopefully, we're going to Michigan to visit a relative of my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a small town out there that has some kind of a cruising car show thing
Okay.
that they want us to see.
Okay.
Evidently, the whole town just turns over to this.
No kidding.
So we're hoping to do that in August this year, and then on the way back, stop at my sister's in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's right at the northern edge of the Amish country,
Right.
and nice area. She was in Florida for a while, tried to get us to come down there, but I love visiting Florida, but I have no desire to move down.
Right.
So now she's in Ohio where her children are and grandchildren. Very happy.
Mm-hmm.
So then that's August. September, it's usually pretty much a week up in Lancaster area. We like the Amish country up there.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
So we
country.
go up there, and then October we're back in Gettysburg for the apple harvest
Mhm.
at South Mountain, and a Halloween weekend.
Sure.
And then I wrap it up for the winter. That's it.
What's the farthest you've taken your motorhome?
Well, we've been across country several times.
Have you?
At least to, well, one time into, twice I guess, we've been into the Utah area.
Mhm.
And beautiful, southern Utah is just so pretty, colorful and all.
Mhm.
But yeah, we've been to Las Vegas with it, and the last time we did a loop around Colorado, and then we headed south and took Interstate 10 back through Texas, stopped in New Orleans,
Mhm.
Atlanta, came up through that way.
Wow. But that was a
But,
great trip.
It was very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I originally had planned on going all the way to the West Coast because I'd like that. They say that I think it's 5 that comes down the coastal highway on the
Mhm.
Pacific side. They say that's so pretty, and I wanted to do it, but I was still working at the time.
Mhm.
Ran out of time. We had my wife's older brother and his wife with us, and there was so much that we wanted to show them,
Right.
like Colorado area and all, Grand Canyon, what have you, that we'd already seen, but we wanted them to see. That I ran out of time,
Yeah.
so I never did get all the way west with it. But
Well, There's always a
it's,
future.
I guess,
Yeah.
yeah. If the traffic doesn't get so bad that I can't motor that thing around,
Mhm.
on the highway, but
And, and is it a diesel or gas?
gas,
Okay. And if
Yeah.
gas prices don't get too prohibitive.
it's starting to, yeah. Like I say, we're not doing as much distance. I mean, this last one I bought new in 2001. We went to Branson and Florida around. Like, we're not doing quite as much distance anymore. And if it keeps on, we might have to camp in the backyard. I don't know.
That's okay.
But
You're still having a good time.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We've really enjoyed it. There's
Well,
a
Earl,
couple.
It was such a pleasure talking to you
Well,
today. This was just such a wonderful
I
conversation.
hope I didn't bore you.
Not
I
at all.
got
You are
carried away.
No, that was fine. I really appreciate you taking the
Yeah.
time and having your thoughts organized. It was such a treat to find out these gems of stories
Yeah.
about Carroll County and about Westminster and all the interesting things that you've done through your
Yeah.
life, the music, playing with the Westminster Municipal Band, and your work and your family and growing up on the farm.
It's,
Just very interesting.
It's a great area
Yeah.
to raise a family, and even today, you
Even
know.
today.
Yeah, even with the crowd and all that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still a good place to live. isn't
Our
it?
school system seems to
Mhm.
be good yet, and
Mhm.
everything, and
Yep.
yeah.
We still got good moral values
Uh-huh.
and good ethics in this community.
I
It's a
have,
nice place.
have no regrets and no desire to move away.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of nice things to see over the United States, but I'm still glad to get back home.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you very much, Earl.
Thank you.